Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome once more to my fireside. The candles are low tonight. Draw your chair closer, for this tale asks something of you. There is a cruelty that polite society practices with exquisite care. The quiet art of judging a woman, not for what she has done, but for what her father did. A disgraced name poisons everything it touches, and the daughter, left standing in the wreckage, must somehow fashion a life from what remains. She carried almost nothing when she arrived at the Duke's door. Only 6 languages, and a single ivory button from her father's coat. The last object the creditors did not think worth seizing. Her name was Arabella Winters, and she came to a grieving house in Hertfordshire in the spring of 1818. Let us go to her now. Silverton Hall sat on a ridge above the Hertfordshire countryside, like something that had once been proud and had since forgotten why. The windows gave back no light at midday. The gardens past the formal borders had gone to tangle, and the gravel drive wore the particular neglect of a house where no one expected callers, and no one especially desired them. Arabella Winters stepped from the hired coach on the 14th of April, 1818, and the cold found her at once. Not the ordinary chill of an English spring, but something that lived in the stone. As though the house had been exhaling sorrow for so long, the walls were damp with it. She was 26. She spoke 6 languages. She carried 4 shillings and an ivory button in the pocket of her grey wool travelling dress, and she had nowhere else in the world to go. The agency in London had not troubled themselves with delicacy. 5 governesses had departed in 18 months. The Duke was unpleasable, the children ungovernable, the household a place where resolve arrived and quietly expired. Arabella's resolve had survived rather worse than a difficult employer. Her father's debts had refined it. His death had set it permanently. She pressed her thumb against the ivory button through the wool, a habit she could not break. The button was small, the sort that belonged on a gentleman's morning coat, and it was the last thing she possessed of his. Not because she had chosen it, but because no one had thought it worth seizing. What no agency ledger could quantify was the particular nature of her intelligence. Arabella did not merely speak 6 languages. She listened in all of them. She read a room the way she passed a passage of Greek, attending not only to what was present, but to what had been carefully left out. 5 households had tested that skill. 5 had also let her go, for reasons that owed nothing to competence and everything to the discomfort powerful men feel when a servant observes too much. The Duke arrived without ceremony. He appeared in the drawing room where Mrs. Dalton had left her waiting, and the air in the room changed. Not with drama, but with weight, the way a space shifts when a heavy door closes somewhere nearby. Edmund Hartwell was 35, tall, silver-touched at the temples, and possessed of eyes the colour of a morning that had decided against clearing. His coat was faultless, his cravat tied with geometrical severity, but Arabella's attention caught on his hands, clasped behind his back with a rigidity that spoke not of good posture, but of suppression. He circled her once, slowly, said nothing. Miss Winters. His voice had the flat quality of a blade kept deliberately dull. The agency informs me you speak 5 languages. 6. Your Grace. French, Italian, German, Latin, ancient Greek, and English. He stopped, faced her. 6. How remarkably useful. For a woman whose father died owing money to half of London. The scold arrived as it always did. That old, inherited burn behind her ribs, immediate and familiar. Her thumb found the button and pressed until the edge left an impression on her skin. She let the small pain steady her. My father's debts are his legacy, Your Grace. My education is mine. Something in his face sharpened rather than softened. You presume a great deal for a governess with no references and no connections. I correct a factual error. I do not consider accuracy presumptuous. The silence that followed had a held breath quality. He studied her with the particular focus of a man who had searched 5 consecutive faces for something, and found each one wanting. I think, Your Grace, she said. And the sentence was out before caution could catch it. That you have been practicing cruelty so long, you have forgotten it is a choice. His jaw tightened. One small, controlled movement. Almost invisible. But Arabella read it as fluently as a line of Cicero. She had told a duke the truth in his own drawing room, and the words were irretrievable. You will begin tomorrow at 8. Mrs. Dalton will show you to your rooms. He turned and left. The door closed with the finality of a sentence that permitted no reply. And Arabella found that her hands were trembling hard enough to make the button click against her thumbnail. 3 children waited in the schoolroom the following morning, arranged like a study in what silence does to the young. The eldest, James, sat with the rigid bearing of a boy who believed any visible imperfection might cost him something essential. The second, Oliver, kept his hands beneath the desk, concealing whatever he loved enough to hide. And the youngest, Caroline, a girl of 7. She sat with such absolute stillness that Arabella could not immediately look away. From that small, composed, devastated face, she would not speak. She had not spoken at all, Mrs. Dalton confided later, since her mother's death 4 years before. Arabella taught them, not as the Duke had demanded, with cold discipline and the elimination of anything resembling warmth, but as the convent sisters had taught her, with patience, and the quiet faith that a child who feels genuinely seen will, in time, dare to be known. Over 3 weeks, the shifts were small, fragile, easily missed if one were not paying close attention. James asked, a genuine question for the first time. Oliver stopped hiding his drawings, which proved to be remarkable, and began leaving them in places where Arabella would find them. And Caroline, with hands that shook so violently she could barely grip the chalk, wrote a single sentence on her slate in trembling French. I love my mother. Then the diplomatic dinner arrived, and every fragile thing Arabella had built came under threat. The Duke commanded her presence at his table that evening, a breach of convention so conspicuous that his aunt, Lady Constance, registered her disapproval with an audible intake of breath. A French diplomatic delegation was dining at Silverton Hall. The ambassador, Monsieur Beaumont, and his wife, along with 2 English lords of political consequence and their wives. Arabella was to sit at the far end. speak only when addressed, and provide linguistic assistance if the conversation grew technical. Useful and invisible. A combination demanded frequently of women in her position, and achieved never. The evening came apart by degrees. The ambassador's French grew dense with the specialized vocabulary of maritime agreements and commercial treaties. Arabella watched the Duke's pauses lengthen. His replies thinned to careful generalities. And she understood, with a certainty that settled over her like cold water, that the Duke of Silverton could not follow what was being said to him. When the ambassador asked a direct question regarding a contentious clause in the proposed treaty, the Duke answered with flawless composure and catastrophic imprecision, suggesting a position so rigid it bordered on insult. The ambassador's expression cooled. His posture shifted by one unmistakable degree. Arabella had perhaps 3 seconds to choose between the silence that would preserve her position and the truth that would almost certainly destroy it. Now, dear listeners, I expect you wonder why she did not simply hold her tongue. Consider the arithmetic. A governess dismissed without a character reference in 1818 did not secure new employment. She disappeared. That was the price of speaking. But the price of remaining silent was knowing she could have prevented a catastrophe and chose her own comfort instead. 2 varieties of ruin. She chose the one she could live with. Let us return to the table. Arabella spoke. Her French was not merely fluent. It was precise, nuanced, and delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had lived inside the language for 18 years. She addressed the ambassador directly, begging his pardon, explaining that His Grace's position had been inadequately conveyed, and that the English stance on the clause in question was considerably more flexible than the phrasing had suggested. She reframed the Duke's answer with such diplomatic care that what had sounded like an insult became, in her rendering, a reasonable opening for further negotiation. The ambassador's expression shifted. The stiffness in his posture eased by one visible degree. He asked, in French, where she had studied. And something in Arabella, some long-suppressed instinct for being fully known after years of making herself small, answered before prudence could intervene. She told him about the convent, in French, then repeated the sentiment in Italian for his wife's benefit. She answered Lord Sinclair's astonished question in German. She offered a brief observation in Latin that drew a startled laugh from Lord Waverley. The room went quiet. Lady Constance set down her glass with the controlled force of a woman preparing a verdict. This is precisely the sort of vulgar exhibition one might expect from a person of uncertain breeding. Edmund, you cannot possibly permit this. Lord Sinclair answered before the Duke could speak. With respect, Lady Constance, Miss Winters has just prevented what might have become a serious diplomatic embarrassment. The ambassador was moments from concluding that England's position was deliberately hostile. Whatever breach of etiquette has occurred, the alternative was considerably worse. The Duke said nothing. He rose from the table with movements so controlled they betrayed everything. His face had gone from white to dark, and Arabella understood with terrible clarity that what she had exposed was not his French. It was him. Miss Winters, the library, now. She followed. The corridor between the dining room and the library was perhaps 40 feet long, and in those 40 feet, the evening collapsed from diplomatic triumph to personal catastrophe. He stood behind his desk with his back to the door, both hands gripping the edge of the oak so tightly the wood creaked once beneath the pressure. Rain had begun sometime during dinner. It struck the tall library windows with a persistence that filled the silence between them. "You made a fool of me," he said. His voice was low and stripped of the practiced coldness she had come to expect. What remained underneath was worse. "Before men whose political respect I require, before my own family, you demonstrated every capability I lack, and did so with the ease of someone for whom it costs nothing. It was not done to diminish you, Your Grace. And yet I am diminished." He turned. His eyes held something she had not seen there before. Not anger alone, but the raw exposure of a man whose armor had been publicly removed. "You wish to know why 5 governesses left this house? Because I could not bear to be observed. Because every woman who entered that schoolroom saw what you saw tonight, that I cannot properly read, that the letters resist me, that the education my rank demanded was a humiliation I endured daily, and have concealed ever since. And you, Miss Winters, with your 6 impossible languages, have made that humiliation public." Arabella's thumb found the ivory button in her pocket, traced the seam where the thread had once held it to her father's coat. The gesture was old, automatic, a sentence she knew by heart. "You are not angry because I spoke, Your Grace." Her voice was steady, though something behind her ribs was not. "You are angry because someone finally saw you clearly, and you cannot bear to be seen." Rain against glass, his breathing, the particular silence of a man deciding whether to let himself be known. "Your children worship you," she said, "and they are terrified of you. Not because you are cruel by nature, but because your grief has made you unavailable to them in every way that matters. You have spent 4 years refusing to love them openly, because you believe that distance will protect you from losing them as you lost their mother." She did not ask him to love her. She asked him to love his children, while they could still feel it. "But distance does not prevent loss, Your Grace. It only ensures you forfeit their hearts, whilst they are still here to offer them." He dismissed her. The door did not slam. It closed with the measured precision of a man who would not grant her even the satisfaction of his anger. She was to leave by morning. No reference, no compensation. The sentence was absolute. In her small chamber, Arabella folded her few possessions into her trunk, with the mechanical competence of someone who had learned long ago how to leave places. The ivory button sat on the nightstand, catching nothing, reflecting nothing. Where would she go now? The question had no useful answer, so she stopped asking it. James came to her door near midnight, still dressed. His young face tracked with tears he had clearly attempted to remove before knocking. He asked her not to leave. She held him while his composure broke, and told him the truths she needed him to carry. that his capacity for feeling was not a deficiency, that perfection was a cage built by frightened men, that he was already more than enough. She did not sleep. Dawn arrived reluctantly, grey and wet, the rain still coming. When she descended to the entrance hall with her trunk, the Duke was waiting. He looked as though the night had cost him something he could not easily repay. His cravat was tied with the approximate care of someone who had dressed without consulting a mirror. His coat was correct, but the man inside it was visibly altered, standing straighter and less defended at once. The three children stood nearby in a tight cluster. James, grim-faced and ready. Oliver, clutching his leather sketch pad against his chest. Caroline, perfectly still, her small hands clasped, her grey eyes fixed on Arabella with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. Miss Winters. The Duke's voice was rough. He adjusted a cuff that needed no adjusting, then let his hand fall. "Before you go, I owe you a truth I should have spoken last night and was too proud to say," he told her. Not fluently, not with elegance, but with the plain, undecorated honesty of a man speaking aloud, for the first time, about something he had hidden for 30 years. The letters had always resisted him. Reading was a daily act of endurance, not comprehension. He had concealed it behind arrogance, because arrogance was simpler than admission. He had punished his children for excelling where he could not, and punished Arabella for seeing what no one else had been permitted to see. "I am not commanding you to remain," he said. "I am asking. And I find that asking is considerably more frightening than commanding ever was. Would you permit me that grace?" Oliver's arms loosened around his sketch pad. Slowly, with the tentative courage of a boy offering the most private thing he owned, he extended it toward his father. The Duke took it, opened it, and his face, that guarded, grief-hardened face, registered something close to wonder. James wept openly, and did not try to stop. And Caroline, who had not spoken in 4 years, whose silence had become so complete that the household had ceased to expect anything else, looked at Arabella and whispered a single word. "Miss Bella." The word landed in the entrance hall like a stone dropped into still water, and every person in that space felt the ripple. Arabella opened her hand. The ivory button lay in her palm, warm from being held through the night. It was still small, still plain, still the sort of thing no creditor would trouble themselves to claim. But it no longer meant what it had meant when she arrived. It meant she was still here, and she had chosen to be. "I will stay," she said. If this tale stirred something in you tonight, dear listeners, I would ask a small favor. Share it with someone who has ever been told their gifts are too much for the room they occupy. And if you have not yet joined our circle, the bell is a quiet way of saying you wish to return. And so concludes this evening's story. My dears, there are many languages worth learning in this life, and Miss Winters had mastered more than most, but the one that changed that house, the one that reached 3 silent children and 1 frightened man, was not French or Latin or Greek. It was the plain, unadorned language of a woman who refused to make herself smaller, so that others might feel less afraid. The bravest words are never the most fluent. They are the ones we speak knowing full well that silence would have cost us nothing. And that honesty may cost us everything. Until next time, dear listeners, the fire burns low, but the stories never do. Yours, Lady Ravenswood.